Hello. I want to talk a bit more about the Uranus-Neptune-Pluto minor grand trine, but this time I want to focus more on the synodic cycle of Uranus and Pluto that began way back in the 1960s, and we are just now, beginning to reach that first waxing trine between Uranus and Pluto, and there are going to be 5 exact trines of those two planets over the next few years. Also, I'll probably repeat a couple of things that I talked about in the last video I did, but that's okay because these are things worth repeating. Okay, let's see if I can share my screen. As usual, this just takes a minute or two. I have to hide some panels so that I can see what I'm doing. And we're just about there. Okay, so this is the Saturn-Neptune conjunction and the Uranus-Pluto synodic cycle. My thoughts for the Mundane Astrology Special Interest Group, Part 6, and my name is Christopher Benton. Now, on October 9th of 1965, there was a conjunction of Uranus and Pluto in Virgo that rocked the world. All the social rules represented by Virgo went out the window, and the huge social transformation, misspelled transformation, I'll correct that later, of the 60s began. And this conjunction was shortly followed by 2 more in 1966. Now, in addition to Uranus conjunct Pluto in Virgo, resulting in a breaking of all the rules, there was also this conjunction of Saturn and Chiron going on in Pisces. And what this did, among other things, was it turned people's attention to the spiritual disciplines of the East, the Far East, in particular India, and people engaged in meditative disciplines. They wanted to go beyond the physical into the spiritual as represented by Pisces. And this trine from Neptune assisted that goal to quite an extent. Okay, the next conjunction of Uranus and Pluto occurred on, let's see, April 4th, 1966. And these conjunctions are part of a cycle that will last until the year 2104. That is when we get the next conjunction of Uranus and Pluto. And as I've said, we are only now approaching the first waxing trine between these two planets. And you look here in 1966, we still have Saturn and Chiron, and Mercury too in conjunction. It's now a stronger, tighter conjunction. It's still being assisted by Neptune in Scorpio, and Neptune is conjunct the lunar nodal axis, which is intensifying its beneficial impact on these planets, and specifically conjunct the South Node, which has to do with things of the past. So again, people are returning, or were returning at this time, to the ancient spiritual disciplines of India and the Far East. And the third and final Uranus-Pluto conjunction of the 60s occurred on June 30th of 1966. And the conjunction, or sorry, the opposition between Uranus-Pluto and Saturn and Chiron is now out of orb, but Saturn and Chiron are still in a pretty tight conjunction, still receiving that trine from Neptune, which is still conjunct the South Node. So again, we saw this renewed interest in Eastern spiritual disciplines. Now, there's a couple of other things I want to draw your attention to. In particular, on August 27th, 1966, there was a Jupiter-Saturn-Neptune grand trine. We had Jupiter in Cancer conjunct Mars, and new types of families were emerging. People were forming communes, and people were recognizing close friends as perhaps more family to them than some of their blood relatives. And also, with Saturn in Pisces, there were social constraints, restrictions, regulations that were breaking down. And with Neptune in Scorpio conjunct the lunar nodal axis, the anthem was, "If it feels good, do it." Here's another little typo. That should be double quotes, not a colon. So, anyway, new families were being formed. People were very energetic about that. They were doing those meditative disciplines, but also the rules of society were breaking down. There was this, if it feels good, do it kind of feeling. And so marijuana, psychedelics, and free love were everywhere at that time. Interestingly, there was a very similar grand trine that occurred around July 29th of 2013. And at this point in time, the definition of families was again expanding, this time to include gay marriage, same-sex unions. It was being energized by Mars. We had Chiron in Pisces again. We had the lunar nodal axis involved, but the roles of Neptune and Saturn were now reversed. With Neptune conjunct Chiron in Pisces, there was this emphasis on marijuana again. But this time it wasn't anything goes. It wasn't if it feels good, do it. With Saturn in Scorpio, the message was legalization with regulation. Oh, another typo. I left out my double quotes here. But anyway, in much of the United States, appropriate laws were passed to help make legalized cannabis a safe experience. So this is a very interesting example of how history rhymes when we get similar configurations. But it's also interesting how, with the roles of Saturn and Neptune switched, the focus was not on anything goes, if it feels good, do it, but do it safely with regulation. And of course, lunar nodal axis was involved, intensifying all those efforts. Now, moving on with the Uranus-Pluto synodic cycle, we reached the first set of sextiles in the mid-1990s. And there was a series of 5 waxing sextiles of Uranus to Pluto. And with Uranus and Aquarius, the World Wide Web and new technological revolution began. And think too of how often in recent years the first degree of Aquarius has been activated. You can see here that Uranus is at 0 degrees Aquarius. In 2020, when Mars and Saturn were conjunct at 0 degrees Aquarius, the COVID pandemic exploded. It came on the scene earlier that year and late fall of 1994, but with that conjunction of Mars and Saturn at this point, it was suddenly everywhere. And then later that year, we had a conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter at 0 degrees Aquarius. And in 2023, when Pluto made its first entry into Aquarius, it stayed at 0 degrees Aquarius for a few months before finally retrograding back into Capricorn for a while. So this has become a very important point in history. Now, the second exact sextile occurred later in 1995. Bill Clinton was president, and progressive policies flourished. You're going to tend to get more progressivism, more globalism, when you have something like Uranus and Pluto forming a sextile. And the third sextile took place in March of 1996 with Uranus in Aquarius and Pluto in Sagittarius. Again, both technology and higher education were in full bloom. The fourth sextile occurred in September 1996, and Bill Clinton would soon be reelected as president. Also, notice that Uranus is once again activating the first degree of Aquarius. And as I said before, this is where Saturn and Neptune were conjunct when COVID was rampant, where the most recent Saturn-Jupiter conjunction occurred, and where Pluto spent a few months in 2023. And then the final sextile took place in 1997 with Uranus close to the USA's South Node. America's South Node and all the July 1776 charts is at 6 degrees of Aquarius, 6 degrees plus of that particular sign. So progressivism and humanitarianism were leading the way, as was technology, as we return to our finer roots. However, a square between these planets would eventually result in conservative backlash, and that began in the year 2012. Okay, so the 1960s, they were a great time for liberalism, progressivism, and globalism in America and the world. And also this new computer technology, the internet, had become accessible to everyone through the World Wide Web, and things were changing rapidly. Now, in 2012, we began a series of squares between Uranus and Pluto. And whenever you reach that first waxing square in any synodic cycle or any cycle, the question that comes to mind is always, is this really what I want to do? Is this really the direction I want to go in? And so in America, we began to get this conservative backlash against progressivism. And we had this square pretty strong for June through September into mid-October in 2012. It was strong for a couple of periods in 2013, also 2014, strong for the first 3.5 months of 2015. And shortly after that, Donald Trump descended the escalator at Trump Tower in New York City to announce his presidential candidacy. He did that on June 16th, 2015, so about here. And that was the culmination of this conservative backlash in America. Now, we're moving into the waxing square. And we got our first taste of this, the waxing trine. We got our first taste of this, not an exact trine, but the first taste in the summer of 2025. And as I pointed out in the last slideshow, we had a near exact conjunction of Saturn and Neptune, and Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, minor grand trine both occurred in the summer of 2025. And this shows us how Saturn Neptune is intertwined with Uranus, Neptune, Pluto at this particular moment. And it's these configurations that will lead us into a new future. So the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, it's not really working independently from the Uranus-Neptune-Pluto minor grand trine that is going to be strong off and on for the next few years. They are connected with one another. And Uranus and Pluto are going to be working with Saturn and Neptune to change our society. our world. Okay, we get the first exact trine between Uranus and Pluto on July 17th of 2026. And this will be the first of 5 exact trines. And every time we have an exact trine, they're also going to be making sextiles to Neptune. So this minor grand trine is going to be present every time we have the exact trine between Uranus and Pluto. Again, this will also be bringing new technology, new inventions into the world, a transfer of power from individuals to people, people rebelling, speaking up, making their voices heard, and those who are more spiritually in tune are going to receive a tremendous boost at this point, and they will discover more deeply the self within and inner spirituality, individual spirituality. And of course, as I pointed out in my last video, just a few days after this exact trine on the 17th of July, we have what the late great mundane astrologer Andre Barbeau felt would be the most harmonious day of the century. And as I also pointed out in the last video, the harmony of this day is reminiscent of a series of outer planet conjunctions that occurred around 575 BCE before the Common Era and brought many new ideas and philosophies into the world, including Taoism, Confucianism, Buddhism, the golden age of Greek philosophy, the writing of some of the Upanishads, and the writing of the Torah during the Babylonian exile of the Jewish people. Okay, now the next exact trine between Uranus and Pluto is going to occur on November 29th of 2026. Again, you see the Uranus, Neptune, Pluto mini grand trine is in effect, and Saturn is now back in orb, loosely conjunct Neptune. At this first one right here, Saturn strayed about 10 degrees away from Neptune. But now they're going to be back together. And among other things, I'm expecting advances in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, 6G connectivity, augmented reality, sustainable technology, and battery innovations, and innovations in communication and inventiveness occurring on steroids, and the visions that people have been having becoming reality. These are new visions, new things that will become concrete realities in the near future. And one of the things I see happening now that we're at the beginning of is people are beginning to personally interact with artificial intelligence and carry on conversations with artificial intelligence in new, exciting ways. They're using artificial intelligence to help them write better, to help them write effective computer codes, and to engage in back and forth discussions with artificial intelligence on topics that they are interested in. And I think this is all a prelude to a time in the not too distant future when artificial intelligence will be coupled with robotics, and we'll be getting closer and closer to that age in the Jetsons, when you would have your servant robots in your house and you would talk to them back and forth. A lot of things are going to change very rapidly, I believe. Okay, the third trine between Pluto and Uranus, that is exact, is going to be particularly interesting for America because Pluto is going to be conjunct America's lunar nodal axis. And all the July 1776 charts, Pluto will be conjunct the south node. And also Uranus is getting within a couple of degrees, or I think closer to 1 degree of its return at 8+ degrees of Gemini in America's natal chart. That's a time when America tends to get involved in conflict either at home or abroad. But the big question in my mind is, will all this harmony help us overcome possible catastrophe in America? It depends upon people's choices, and it remains to be seen. The fourth trine between Pluto and Uranus, exact trine, will also be interesting because Pluto will once again be conjunct America's lunar nodal axis. It'll be conjunct the south node at 6+ degrees of Aquarius. Also, as I've mentioned, all 5 trines of Uranus and Pluto will occur as part of this ongoing Uranus, Neptune, Pluto minor grand trine. And the fifth and final waxing exact trine between Pluto and Uranus will be in May of 2028. And for America, Uranus will be conjunct its natal position at 8+ degrees of Gemini. And this would normally be a time in which America might find itself at war, at home or abroad, but it is possible that harmony will prevail. Okay. It's always a question, will the harmony that we see on this particular day overwhelm or overcome the the tensions of this day, of the Uranus return, or the Pluto conjunct the South Node? Well, once again, depends upon our choices and remains to be seen. But one way or another, Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto, working with that Saturn-Neptune conjunction, they are going to radically change our world, and I suspect that change is going to happen very fast over the next 5 years and maybe persist for the next few hundred years. A lot of old structures will be going away. New thoughts, new ideologies will be coming in to replace them as a result of Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And with Saturn and always Neptune, part of this minor grand trine, there's going to be a lot of change, a lot of invention, a lot of new technology coming along, and people rising up, power shifting to the people in some form or fashion. And here is just a graphic ephemeris showing when these trines between Uranus and Pluto are going to be exact. And I've got the approximate dates down here for you to take a look at. And it looks like that is going to be it. So let me stop sharing my screen here. As with these other videos, I hope this has been informative. It gives you my thoughts on what to expect from the Saturn-Neptune conjunction and the Uranus-Neptune-Pluto minor grand trine that will be interacting with Saturn-Neptune. And we definitely live in interesting times. Some empires may fall, but new things and perhaps better things, hopefully, will come and replace them. There's a good chance that we are going to be repeating a lot of the progressivism and liberalism of the 1960s, as in the synodic cycle, we move from the conjunction of Pluto and Uranus to the waxing grand trine. And so good times may lie ahead in many ways. If so, I'm looking forward to that. I have one more video that will follow this one where I'll give some final thoughts on this entire process. I hope you watch that one too. But for now, I'll just say so long and be well.